a gazillion kids here. I mean, it was, I don't know if you were here, but it was like overload kids. It was fantastic. And, I felt like being Mother's Day, it's really important to kind of get this message across. And so a lot of those families aren't here today, probably because it's nice out and everybody's like, we're going to go do something outside for Mother's Day, which is great. But if you agree with what I said today after we're done, would you forward this from Facebook to folks that you know? Because I feel like this is something that I wish I had an audience of 1,000, and through media now we can do that. And so if you believe that we've nailed it on the head a little bit with this, please feel free to forward that. But growing up, I had a great mom. She's right there. She's raising her hand. Mom, she could be my best friend, or she could bring the wrath of God, just depending on the day and how I was acting. But I'll never forget my sister and I. Mom had a paddle, a wooden paddle. How many of your moms had a wooden paddle? Okay, good. And so hers was her mom. She used to be a school teacher, and it was signed by some of the kids who had been spanked by it. And it said Board of Education right on it. And I can remember when my sister and I would be bad, and we were bad a lot. And so she'd get fed up with us, and she'd say, you're going to get a spanking. So we'd go into the kitchen. She'd get the paddle out of the drawer, and she'd say, put your hands on the bar. And that was like the words I'll never forget. Put your hands on the bar. So you put your hands on the bar and then whack, maybe a couple times. And then we'd be in timeout for a while or something. But, that's what we needed, right? And so, but, there were other times that were really, really powerful. There were times that, and I was a person that when I did something that was wrong, I was very convicted by that. And so I couldn't live with myself until I confessed to my mom. And so she knew that it was going to come out eventually, that I would say it. And so I would say, Mom, I've made some bad choices, and I want you to know about it. And here's what I did, And usually she was a voice of reason and a voice of encouragement and a voice of forgiveness, because I was confessional. It wasn't like I was trying to get one over on her. I was just saying, hey, here's what I did. And then there were times when we yelled at each other, and then I can remember sitting on the bed together, on the edge of the bed, and saying, I'm really sorry that I said those things. And she said, I'm really sorry too. But it was those times that began to form how I would treat my wife. It formed how I would see the world. And so, it was a powerful, powerful thing. And I don't think you have to be a biological mother to have the honor of impacting someone's life. In fact, I was looking this week that Mother Teresa had no kids of her own. She was, had committed her life to being a nun in the church. And so she was celibate all of her life, but she was Mother Teresa. She impacted the lives of thousands of people over the course of time because she showed everybody that she met with motherly and godly love. And so here's the thing. From the time we're born, doesn't our mother shape how we see the world and how the world's going to see us? So it goes both ways. We get to be shaped on how we're going to see the world, but how the world sees us. Now, I do want to put a caution in there and say this, that none of us get the result we want all the time from our efforts. And so, I'm still hoping that over the course of time, all of my kids will end up being dedicated followers of Jesus, But that's not something that happens overnight. And so, we can't expect that if we do this, this, and this, if we can complete the list of things that we should do, that somehow we think that we're going to always get the right result. Because our kids have free will, don't they? Our kids have free will. Our kids have their own challenges and trauma and things that they're dealing with. And so we can't always get the right outcome, but we can do everything we can that's in our power. And so Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 says this: start children off on the way that they should go, and even when they are old, they will not what? Turn from it, right? The NLT says it this way: direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. And so whose job is it to make sure that the kids are getting on the right path? Whose job is it? Well, it's the mothers and the fathers, right? But today we're talking about the mother's influence. And so, here's the thing. I think the most powerful influence that we get is by example, right? By our mother's example. Not by what they say, but by what they do and how they live their life. And so the truth is, and I kind of asked some people about this phrase because I didn't want it to be too harsh, but that children tend to become the example they see. Now, not always, but they tend to become the example they see, right? And so I wanted to talk just for a little bit about the 4 ways that I think what they see impacts who they become. And so the first one is how you practice your faith in Jesus. I think that seriously impacts their future and how they respond. So I think I've got this wrong, Shirley. I think I've got this wrong. So she helps me with the bulletin every week. Now, you might have got it right in the bulletin because we kept talking about it. But there's Psalm 31 and Proverbs 31. And I think Proverbs 31 is the wife of noble character. And so I have a few excerpts from that scripture. And here's what it says. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. How many of you guys feel like your mother walked you through with instruction that was very, very helpful in times of need? Some of us still, at times, call our moms, I think. When we're really hurting, we're really confused, we call them for advice. And so then it says this. I love this. Verse 30. It kind of concludes this section talking about a godly mother. And it says this: charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That at the end of the day, it's a woman who fears the Lord who trains their children up in the way of the Lord. And so one of my daughters, Faith, you've seen her here maybe, and her daughter Hannah, but they do some things that are routine. So she reads Bible stories with her kids every night. So they know more. I bet you right now, Noah and Hannah, now how old's Noah? 3? 3.5. Hannah's 5. Together, those two know more scriptures than we do, all of us put together. I mean, they've memorized them. It's amazing. And so they know these things, and they're being prepared for what's to come. They pray before meals. Do you guys pray before meals? Still pray before meals? We do that. Mom and Dad and I, if we go out to eat quite often, we still, and Mom wouldn't let us eat without praying, and I wouldn't either. And so, if we forget, you know how you do that sometimes, you forget and you put something in your mouth, you're like, hey, you didn't pray yet. And so we pray. And some people might think, well, that's old-fashioned, or we don't need to do that. But when you're working with your children, and they know, so now when our grandkids come over, even the ones that don't always go to church very often, they know it's time to pray. And they know that they need to wait to pray before they eat so that we can thank God for what's been provided for us. And it's just a powerful, powerful example. And then my big one, I think, is growing up in the church. How many of you guys grew up in the church? Okay, so almost all of you. I can't tell you. Now, I grew up at Grace Shot Church, so very little United Methodist Church. And honestly, the worship was terrible. The preaching was average. And they did responsive readings, and most of the time the music was an organ. And so I was like, this is terrible. But God shaped me through that ministry. And those people that poured into my life probably saved my life. And so when I would go through times of struggle, times when I did wrong things, I could go to my youth leaders and say, here's what I'm struggling with. And they could talk me down or talk me off the ledge. You know, they could be the ones to talk some sense into me or help me to forgive myself or to forgive someone else. They were the source that I needed. And so growing up in the church is huge for faith development. Here's the second one. This is really important. The second one is your emotional stability. Your emotional stability. Just look at your neighbor and say, are you stable? Go ahead. Are you stable? So some of you enjoyed that too much. So here are some signs of emotional instability, okay? So these are things to look out for because the way you react to the world is what your kids see, right? The way you react to the world, your example, is what they will become someday. And so here are some of the signs of being kind of emotionally unstable. So if you're easily offended all the time, if you're always in defense mode, I always like it, and men, we always get in trouble for this. Our wives can say, and Melissa and Faith, my daughter, do this to me all the time. If I say anything at all, doesn't matter what it is, they can say, what does that mean? And all of a sudden I'm in trouble. I'm like, well, that food was really good today. What's that mean? Wasn't good any other day? You know? I mean, there's always a way to turn it around. And so we have fun with that. But if you're defensive all the time, which they're not, then that could mean that you've got some emotional instability. If you can't admit that you're wrong, if you easily cut off relationships because it's better to cut off a relationship than it is to admit that you're wrong or just get over something, then that's a red flag. If you have lots of angry outbursts or are hypersensitive to criticism of your kids, I love that. That if you're always on defense mode for your kids and you can't accept a little bit of criticism or help them to accept it, help them to say, well, that's okay, honey. Partly they're right. Or, you know, this is something that we can ignore because they're way off base. But aren't we going to all face criticism? The rest of our lives, we're going to face criticism. So if we're not getting them prepared for that, then it's just going to snowball. If you have fear of rejection, or if most relationships blow apart, then I think that our kids begin to see that pattern in our lives, and that could be something that can damage them. One of the things I think we need to deal with, and maybe some of us in this room are in this boat, we might need to deal with our own past trauma. That we might have some things that have happened in our life, happened to us, that we've never told anybody about. But I can promise you that if you haven't dealt with your own past trauma, that if you haven't received counseling, done some serious prayer, done some serious healing over that, if you haven't done that, your past trauma, whether anybody else knows about it or not, it will affect your kids. In fact, here's the way I say it, is that emotionally damaged parents can damage their children. And that's not fair, it's not pleasant to hear, but it's something that we have to accept as a reality if we don't want our kids to be affected by things that damaged us in the past. And so I say, seek healing. Ask for forgiveness or grant forgiveness to yourself. Pray about it. Get counseling. Get support. Take your meds. Why is it that we think we can just go off of our meds? I mean, I've done that because I ran out. You do not want to see me off of my meds. I'm just saying, I love Jesus and I love all of you, but you don't want to be around me when I had my regular meds. It's just not good. And so take your meds, you know. Try to understand that whatever our dysfunction is, if we don't deal with that, it'll pass on to our kids. Here's the third one. Our work ethic and our toughness. Our work ethic and our toughness. So in Proverbs it says this, she sets about her work vigorously and her arms are strong for the task. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of what? Idleness, right? So in other words, don't be lazy, right? How many of you had hardworking moms? I mean, day and night, right? They're always cooking, cleaning, working. You know, they're always taking us to ball games and whatever when we're young. It's like the job never ends. And so do your kids see that you're a hard worker? I would say this, that, again, remember, your kids become what they see in you, right? And so if they see you as a hard worker, dedicated, then that's what they're going to do as well. Tim Phillips and I were talking this past week, and he told me a story. He said his mom worked 35 years at the same place. 35 years at the same place. How many days off do you think she took for being sick? 1, because they sent her home. She was so sick they sent her home. That's the way it used to be, right? People were like, their work ethic was through the roof. Do you think we've gotten soft? I think we have. We've gotten soft. And I think we've gotten soft with our kids as well. And so very seldom when a kid gets hurt do you hear these words, shake it off, take a deep breath, you'll be okay, right? And here's what I've experienced with my grandkids, and I love it because all my grandkids are tough as nails. I mean, they can be running through the house full speed, slam their head against the table, and just bounce off and cry for like 2 seconds, and somebody says, shake it off. Pretty soon they're just up playing again. But if you get upset too, and then you coddle them and you go into 5-alarm emergency, they think it's the end of the world, then they cry harder. And it's like all of a sudden, every time they get hurt, it's a huge emergency. We've got to learn how to dial it back for them and learn how to help them contextualize whether this is really an emergency or not. One of my favorite pictures, I wish I had it, was a picture of, I think it was Joshua, and he had blood all over his face from hitting his face on something, or I forget what it was, and he was just smiling like it was a big badge of honor, because he just wanted to be tough. And I think that we need to build that in our kids. And when I was talking to my daughter, Faith, about that, here's what she said. She said that when we help our kids to be tough, that we're preparing them for the world, right? We're preparing them to leave the nest, which is the goal of mothering. It's not to coddle them and to protect them from everything that could happen, but to get them tough so they're prepared for a tough world. And so when we toughen them up, we're doing our job. Here's the last one, number 4. How you handle failure. I would say this is probably one of the top ones. That when we fail, how we fail and how we handle that will shape them for the rest of their lives. And so I want to ask you a couple questions. How do you handle when you look stupid in front of other people? How many of you guys are like super embarrassed when you do something stupid in front of other people? I am. I remember, I wasn't going to tell this story, but it just came to me, so I'm going to tell it. It's always dangerous when I do that. Melissa's always afraid what I'm going to say. So I I was trying to buy her something before we got married. I was in this store. I was nervous. And so it had a glass front on it. And so I talked to these salespeople a little bit. I'm just like, I don't know what I want, you know. And so I got nervous and I started walking back out of the store, and I ran smack into the glass instead of going out the exit. And then I stumbled out the exit, and I felt so dumb, you know. But here's the thing. You all do dumb things, right? Just look at your neighbor and say, you do dumb things. You do dumb things, right? It's okay. We all do dumb things. The deal is that if we let something like that destroy us, if we let something like that melt us down to where we don't want to be in front of anybody, then we're not handling it very well. We've got to accept the fact that we all do dumb things. And so it's okay to be embarrassed. It's okay to look stupid once in a while. In fact, some of us do it on purpose just to be funny, right? If you've made a big mistake, I mean like a mistake that affected other people, how do you handle that? Do you apologize? Do you say you're sorry? Do you try to admit it and figure it out? And then what about when you've sinned? What about when you've sinned and you've done things that were wrong, maybe outside of the home or inside of the home? Are you willing to say, I'm sorry, please forgive me? Those things affect how your kids will be shaped for the rest of their lives. And then lastly, I want to talk about discipline and love. Discipline and love. I looked up the definition that Google has for love, and this was crazy to me. The Google says that love is an intense feeling, everybody say feeling, intense feeling of deep affection. And then it says, babies fill parents with feelings of love. Really? All the time? Because I'm telling you, when they're toddlers, and then when they're preteens, and then when they're teens and they say, stuff it, I'll do what I want, you're not filled with feelings of deep affection. Your feelings are more like rage, you know. Your kids are in danger. And so, you know, what's wrong with this definition that the world has of love? It's about feelings. In fact, I would say this. Do you guys agree that the world now kind of equates the word yes with love? That if you love me, you'll say yes. That if your kids want something, the loving answer is always yes. And that is completely the opposite. In fact, I would say that's what's destroying our youth today, what may be destroying our country in the future, if we continue to say yes to our kids. Have you guys ever been around somebody, a kid, that has never been told no? Oh, yeah. How fun is that? I mean, you're just like, get me away from this kid, right? Well, here's what happens. If a child has never been taught delayed gratification, they've never been taught how to share, they've never been taught to serve one another. We were at home with some of the kids the other day, and the kids got done eating, and Hannah, they take their plates, all of our grandkids take their plates and go put them in the sink. They don't leave a mess. They put them in the sink. So then Hannah comes back and grabs Melissa's plate and goes and puts it in the sink without being asked. I said, what planet are we on? That these little kids are already serving someone else. And so here's what happens when kids don't get taught these things, and this is very, very important. That when kids are not taught, and they're always told yes, and they're never told no, what happens is they become miserable human beings to be around, for one thing, right? But what's worse is they alienate the people around them. So you think about the kids that are in a preschool or in a school who have never been taught the word no, never shown limits for themselves. They become an outcast. Nobody wants to play with them. And then what happens is they start to get a complex, and then they get insecure because no one wants to play with them. And then they start to develop social anxiety. They start to not be able to function very well in groups of people. Other kids won't play with them. They're not chosen for things. And so then that spirals, doesn't it? And so maybe a kid that has never been told no won't be able to hold a job down because they always thought that the answer should be yes. That maybe they won't have as good of a chance of having good relationships. Or maybe they'll never surrender their lives to Jesus because they were never taught these things. And so I want to talk about this last thing. The most important battle. The most important battle is discipline. Would you agree with me on that? The most important battle is discipline. Proverbs chapter 13 says, whoever spares the rod does what? Hates, right? Hates their children. But the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. And so real love includes discipline. How many of you guys are thankful that your parents disciplined you? How many of you are thankful? Amen, right? That you didn't just get away with everything. That you weren't allowed to run the roost. That they had rules and expectations. And so here's the thing that's hard about that. When you have kids, I don't think anybody who has kids realizes that they've signed up for a life sentence. That for the next 18 to 20 years to life, they're in a battle to teach their kids to do the right thing. I can't tell you, with our oldest son, Tyler, when he was little, he was so stubborn, he would not listen. So you'd put him in timeout, and he'd just say, I'm getting up, and he'd get up. You'd have to put him back in the chair. I mean, you might have to do that 10 times. Now, multiply that by about 10 times a day for 10 years. You want to poke your eyes out. I mean, you're like, this is miserable. This is not what I signed up for. But this is the battle that will determine the outcome of their life. And if you stick to it, it will help them. And if you don't, and you just give in all the time, it will ruin them, won't it? It will ruin them. And so we've got to be very, very careful about that. And so we have to decide to discipline and guide our kids so that the world won't have to. That's a hard one, isn't it? So that the world won't have to. It's a battle we have to decide to keep doing. And here's the last thing. We need to always combine discipline with choices and consequences. We need to always combine discipline with choices and consequences. So here's the deal. This last statement, I hope that maybe you can even take a picture of this and just put it on Facebook for me. But the total outcome of your kids' lives will be determined by their choices and their consequences. Would you agree with that? That the total outcome of your kids' life will be determined by their choices and the consequences. And so we have to teach them that from a very early age, that when they make choices, there's going to be consequences. And so here's what happens with our grandkids, is that when we do a meal together, we say, here's what you're eating. If you don't like that, you need to try it. If you don't want to try it, then no dessert. And that's kind of our blackmail, right? But it works sometimes. And so they'll try it. Now, we don't want them to eat the whole. If they don't like it, we're not going to force them to choke down the whole thing. But usually what happens is they realize, you know what? This isn't too bad. And so they'll eat it. But there are times when my grandkids, and they know this now, and with no fight, no fit, nothing, they'll say, their mom will say, if you don't want to eat that, you're not getting dessert. Do you want dessert? And they'll go, no, I don't want dessert. I'm like, really? A 5-year-old is saying I'm okay with choosing not to eat my food and not getting dessert? And they're just like, that's what I choose. But how powerful is that? That they're learning right from the very beginning that their choices have consequences, and we've got to make sure that they understand that that cycle is going to continue for the rest of their life. That what they choose comes with consequences. Do you guys have kids that have temper tantrums in front of you? Ever have? I mean, I think all kids have temper tantrums. I don't think there's any way to parent in such a way that your kids will never have a temper tantrum. Don't think it's possible. But how we handle that is crucial. And so what we do and what I've seen other people do is they'll say, all right, you're throwing a fit. I want you to go sit on the steps. You're not going to throw things in the living room. You're not going to flail and scream and all that. So go sit on the steps. And when you decide you can be a reasonable human being, you can come back. And you know what happens when you're not making over them and you're just kind of ignoring them, let them sit by themselves. They take a breath. They decompress. They begin to understand what it is to control their own emotions. And then they can come back and be a part of the family. So let's stand. I made it. I made it. So here's what I think. I think this, you can't do this. You can't do mothering without God, right? You can't do it. You can't stick to the battle day after day for 18 to 20 years without the help of God. Hopefully a good husband, if you know that's working out. A community of faith. But you can help your children to be Christ-honoring world changers. And I think that's what is going to save this culture, this generation, from imploding, is when mothers are empowered by the Holy Spirit. So let's sing this closing song.
In the crushing